Welcome back to a special edition SCX24 hard part build. And if you're familiar with hard part crawlers, you're familiar with just how difficult it is to actually get your hands on any of their specialized releases. So I count myself among the lucky to have actually stumbled upon this at the right time to be able to pick it up. But before I show you what's in that box, let's take a look at the supplies on the table. Almost too many to fit here on the mat. So you can see I've got quite a bit of purple, quite a bit of little guy, a little bit of Mofo, of course a little Furitek as always. Gonna have some surprises, I've got some new parts, but the main jewel is what's hiding here in the box. So let's dive into this build. So here we go. Let's see what we've got here. We got a nice little note from Hard Park. Thanks, Chad. So what is in the box here? Look at that. You thought I was going to pull a chassis out of there. It's not going to be that easy. So we've got our assembled Super 8s here, ready to go for the build. Both plastic housings. I am using the brass diff cover on the front and some Dubro brass knuckles. I've got little guys billet steering links and little guys billet aluminum trimmer servo mount. So it's got the 3 adjustable link points. It's not adjustable at the servo. And then speaking of servo, we've got Nsdrc's nice limited edition purple and purple servo horn version of the RS100. And then in the diff, we're running 213 overdrive gears. So that is the front axle, and then the rear is a plastic housing as well. We're running Mofo's 20% underdrive gears. And then I've got a little touch of purple with that double captured Treal upper link mount. So both of these axles are greased with udder butter, nice and smooth, ready to go for the build. So I think since those are assembled and we've got the servo on, let's take a look at these servo specs. So that is pretty insane, 197 ounce-inches at 8.4 volts, and that's what I'll be running this at. So that's some finger-breaking power right there. So I think since we've already kind of started into the build with a little bit of purple, I think maybe we continue on with a little bit of purple and we'll swing back around to see what else is in this box. So here we are with some more purple, and this time in the form of a Treal aluminum transmission case. And I've got inside that some Mofo RC hardened steel gears, and hooked up to that is Mofo RC's NanoBam brushless motor here, and it's on the forward facing mount, which could also be flipped to a reverse facing mount, and that will be dependent on the chassis, which we don't really know what we're working with yet. And I did get a little bit of wiggle room in that mesh, but you can hear it's going to be a lot louder than plastic gears because of the metal internals all the way through. But that is ready to go and tested. And speaking of tested, I soldered up my second micro receiver. So I'm pretty happy that all tested out and works fine. So I've got a Furitek Ultimate plan, but like I said, because the chassis is unknown at this point, not sure about fitment, can always switch to a Lizard Pro. But for now, let's move on. Time to get back in this box, not literally, but figuratively. So let's get this open again and see what's actually in here. And once again, you're welcome, Chad. It was my pleasure. So what did they actually send us here in the box? Well, look at that. That's still not a chassis. That looks like some shocks and some highly specialized links. So let's dig into these guys. So these shocks fall into the category of something purple, something new, and something limited to go along with that purple limited edition servo. So these are from Ktech RC, and as far as I can tell, they specialized in color. So basically a lot of different unique colors for anodized parts, but they do have this one functional part on the site, which was these limited edition 48mm purple anodized shocks. So these are really pretty. I really like the purple anodized little ball studs and the full kind of telescoping shaft piece, piston, and they have 3 springs that they come with, and the black on here are deceptive. They're not, as black springs are typically the softest, these are the firmest. So I've swapped on the golds, which in this case are the softest, with the silvers being the mediums. So really big difference. These are just like, these remind me of Kinetics, like super soft springs on the telescoping shocks, just very soft. So not sure the spring rates I'm going to use, but 100% I'm not going to use the stiffest on this build. And speaking of color, they give you 2 sets of hardware, black and silver, although they gave me, looks like some wrong silver hardware, but that is nice. They give you an option to black it out if you want to. But anyways, that's the long 48mm and the short of the shocks. Quick look at these hard part links. So these are titanium cut, just blade links. So very thin, very light. And you can see there, they have a flat transition to the ball stud on the bottom. So it gives you the ability to slide, you know, from the link to the skid plate or the axle mount. So that occurs, it looks like, at the bottom of the lowers. This looks like the front upper, so it does not have that, but it shouldn't be sliding over anything. What is odd is this, what I assume to be the upper, actually has that smooth transition point on the top. So again, not knowing the setup, this is an assumption of rear and front, so we'll know further when we actually get to assembling the chassis. So for now, I think I'm going to dig into all these O-rings and ball studs, get these assembled, and we'll move forward. Okay, it's time to jump back into this box. And again, not literally. So let's get this guy open and see what we actually got here. Wait a minute. That's not a chassis either. These look like purple wheels. Come on, Chad. Well, I guess if we've got purple wheels, we may as well find some tires for them. Time for tires. And I've got a super hard decision here in front of me, yet it's going to be a very easy decision. So I've got little guys 57mm Swamp Kings here on the left, and I've got Proline's Mickey Thompson Baja Pro X's here on the right. And what makes this a difficult decision is both of the tread patterns are very similar. They are basically the same size, and both of these have just a really good compound. So that's going to make the choice very difficult, trying to find a distinguishing feature between them. What's going to make this very easy is that either tire I go with is going to be a great tire. So with that said, let's take a quick look at these Treal Type Bs. So those are just gorgeous in the purple anodized. So these are the old school, been around since the beginning, so no removable hub on these, but these are just excellent wheels and just great looking. So I think now I'm going to flip a coin, figure out some way to make a decision and get a set of these mounted up. A tire decision has been reached. So I ended up choosing the Little Guy Racing 57mm Swamp Kings, which I think will be a great choice for this build and for these wheels. I did stick with the stock foams, but I ended up venting the tires, as you can see here, on center of the tread. I did that on the opposite side of the wheel as well. That's very easy to do with this little leather punch tool. You can select the size of the hole you want to punch and just pop it through. So very handy. But with that combination of the stock foam and the venting, these feel just super good. So I'm hoping these perform just as good as they feel. And as promised, first little surprise of the build, I ended up swapping out the outer beadlock ring for this nice carbon fiber ring. So this is from Killr chassis. And then I added some scale hardware from Mazz Designs, and man, I think that just sets it off. So you still get some purple, just a little more of a hint of it, and of course you get that nice pattern of the carbon fiber on the outer ring. So I'm very happy with the look of that. So I think that completes wheels and tires. Look at all that purple. I think this is shaping up to be a pretty nice build, although there's still some mystery left to be revealed. So I think we're still missing one vital component. So you know what that means. It's time to go back to the box. The moment of truth. Let's get this box open. See what we've got here. What do you have for us, Chad? Drive shafts? Come on. Well, I guess technically it is a vital component that we still are lacking to complete the build, so thanks, Chad. Once again from the top, box open. What's up, Chad? What do you have for us? Could this be it? Oh, look at that. I think it's been worth the wait. Look at that beauty. I think it's time that we get into this packaging and see what this is all about. Thanks, Chad. You're the man. After much anticipation, we have here the hard part crawlers V2 Dementor chassis in carbon fiber. But what makes this so unique is the shape of this roofline. That has been totally redesigned to mimic that of a Volkswagen Bug, as well as adding in this rear window. And I think they did a killer job. It looks great. So everything you see on the table is what is included in this base builder's kit. You get the 2 rails, the roof, the flat skid and hardware, and the ESC tray and hardware. So not much to this kit. I think most of the challenge with any of these chassis kits is going to be squeezing the electronics into the very small space they provide there. But let's go over a few of the unique points of this actual chassis. First off being the flat skid. So other than being flat, you'll notice that it's got 2 slotted connections here for the transmission. They also provide you an additional 3rd mount mirrored across the skid. So that means you can mount this up to the chassis and then flip the motor transmission at will. So that is very convenient. The next thing, they actually provide Nsdrcs here for the connection points to the chassis. So that will be super secure. The next thing is the lower link mounts. They're angled out for wider axles. That's really going to help with the Super 8s I'm using. They also have recessed hardware that pockets in right here. So you have to mount the lower links prior to mounting this to the chassis, which is fairly typical with the flat skids. And then the last thing you'll notice is there is no upper link mount on that skid. So the chassis provides you plenty of link riser mount positions for those. It also looks like the actual tray is slotted there at the bottom, so that may be able to move forwards and backwards in the frame. We'll just have to see as we get into the build, but overall I think this is going to be a very fun build with some challenge, a lot of that probably being in the electronics and the link setup, suspension setup, but that is part of the fun. So let's dive into this guy. Thought I would give you a little mid-build update here. So you can see I've got the roof kind of mocked on there, and that's already looking really cool. So I'll get that out of the way, and let's talk about the rear suspension setup here. So initially putting these shocks on at 48 millimeters, of course it was sitting like this, and especially with the medium springs. So I've swapped in the softer springs, and then you can see I've got a limiter here. So that limiter is a center limiter going up to one of these aluminum crossbars that I added to the kit. So that is going to allow full pivot, but it's going to keep the body from unloading, and it's going to keep that axle from dropping out as much and just get this thing sitting lower overall. Initially I had this as the shock point to brace the shocks and the frame, but I ended up backing those up with micro nuts, moving this back, and I played with a few positions here, just trying to get the right tension and also the right amount of up travel. So you can see I went to the larger holes up top, so I had to use like a little spacer washer so the hardware wouldn't slip through there, but that's a nice tight connection there. So I got a good brace, and I've got a tie-off point. So that is my full compression bump stop hitting those upper links right there. And then on twist, I get right to the frame with these lower links, and then you can see my uppers are hitting that bump stop. So that is just about exactly perfect. So I don't think I actually hit the frame with the lowers. I might, but it just, I mean, it bump stops right here perfectly, and I'm almost, this may be full compression of the actual shock. Right up the middle it's not, but on side to side. So I think I'm happy with the overall rear suspension, at least for now. So let's move on and see if I can't get anything worked out for the front end. One quick note on the shock setup I forgot to mention was that I ended up removing one O-ring on the flange side, which is that outer side on top and bottom here. and you see why these things angle out pretty extreme because of the width of these. So with both O-rings, it's just too tight of a connection, so it caused binding right through here. So right now they're just super smooth. So that is very typical with telescoping. You usually have to take out an O-ring, make sure there is no binding and there is you know, just good twist. Everything is nice and loose, and it can keep this shock shaft straight throughout this motion here. So you can see how much those shock bodies actually have to move to be able to do that. It's basically straight to the frame and then it's out, so sometimes those O-rings just cause way too much tension for that to happen. So just a little note there. Time for a little front end update. So got this axle hung, obviously sitting nice and level and low. So I'm achieving that with a couple rubber bands on each side at the shocks. So I think that is looking really nice right there. Looks nice and even as far as where the axles are. On this rear axle, I did pull this link mount point back one hole to kick this diff back really, and that was to get this drive shaft angle up even basically with those lower links, since those are cut at such an extreme angle. So that should be a nice smooth transition right there. So this is kind of the first time I've done such an extreme rear axle adjustment, but you know, when you're using these extreme cut links, it does make some sense, or else you're not really getting the usage or the advantage out of those. But back to the front, as far as the links, the challenge here was the uppers, of course, and the servo clearancing this electronics tray. So you can see I've got the servo clearanced, but I'm still running into just a little issue here I'm not happy with. So I could clip kind of the front edge of this plastic tray off. I still may hit the carbon fiber frame. I've adjusted, you know, all 3 points on the servo tray and multiples here, trying to lean this and adjust the caster of this axle. But the next adjustment forward just really kicks it. And I'm not liking it. You know, it really points the servo horn down, and you know, it's just looks like it would hang up on a lot of things. So right now I'm happy with the axle geometry. I'm just not happy with that right there catching. So I think the option I've got besides chopping that tray is to swap in this aluminum adjustable Mofo servo tray, and that allows me to actually move the servo independently of the axle. So that may be the solution. It only has one link mount rather than 3, but since I've got all these link riser adjustment points, that's not a concern because I can do my fine tuning down here rather than up here. So I think that's the next step for me, is figuring out if I can get that final bit of clearance worked out on that front axle, and then we'll see about getting kind of the middle part in. Once again, Mofo RC's adjustable best servo mount ever, coming through, solving the problem. So you can see I've got little guys swapped out. So side by side, it looked like Mofo RC's put the servo a little further forward. In relation to the axle, using these forwardmost post mounts. So that's how I've got it set up here, and that seemed to be just enough to get any clearance issues there solved at that cord. So it looks like I've got free twist. I may just barely tap it now, but it's nothing like it was, and it's nothing that the weight of the axle can't travel through. So I'm happy with that now. I ended up staying with the same lower position here. It's kind of that middle row rear hole, but that seemed to be the length. I tried a few more and kind of pulled it back, leaned it forward, and this seemed to be kind of the best middle ground there, with it just barely tapping the cord, you know, maybe. But honestly, I think it's, you know, 99% perfect. Going to be insane travel. Look at that articulation. Let's twist it up here. We'll just set it on 2 tires here. Let's see if we can twist it and sit it. There we go. So I'm happy with that. I think this is a good start point for the initial suspension setup and tuning. So I think now we're going to move on to the motor transmission and drive shaft fitment, get all that set up, and then we'll look at the challenge phase, the electronics. Wheels are off, but motor transmission and drive shafts are in. So let's take a quick look here. So obviously I had to orient the NanoBam facing rearward because of that front tray. And in doing that, you flip the transmission on the skid. And the transmission sits symmetrical on that skid, but the outputs for the drive shafts are not symmetrical coming out of that transmission. So when you flip it, you make the rear drive shaft shorter and you make the front longer. So you can see here, I've got some drive shaft pieces on the table. So I actually had to pull out the JLU front, remove it, put in a JLU rear, and then trim that down to fit. And I did the same on the deadbolt rear. I just had to trim a little bit off to make that work. But the front was fully dropping out with these long shocks, and you can see now I've got plenty of engagement, a little bit there at compression, same here, plenty of engagement, a little bit of give at compression. So that is all working out just great. The next little thing I wanted to look at was the drive shaft. So that does tuck up just perfectly with those rear high clearance links. And then the NanoBam clearances as well for that upper link. So you can see there, we're at full compression, nothing's touching it. Let's see, full twist, nothing is touching it. So those are the kind of things you need to check. First off, is just make sure you're not touching that motor if you've got an outrunner. If you've got an in-runner, it doesn't really matter if you tap it, but if this is going to be moving, you don't want to hit it. And then the last little tweak I made was in starting to route the servo cable, I was putting in some kind of serious bends underneath to clear that upper link under the tray and then get back across the top of the drive shaft. And in doing that, I figured out I could flip this rubber band to this side of the servo, and it really holds this cord edge tight. It also allows the opposite side to drop under that tray. So that works out much better. So I'm very happy with this setup now. So you know what that means. We are moving on to the challenge phase. But one little tip I've got for you for cutting those drive shafts, I use this little K&S pipe cutter tool. They make the little brass tubing you can find at hobby shops, but this makes a really clean, even cut, and it doesn't crush the end of the drive shaft like flush cutters would. So once you've trimmed it, you still get very smooth engagement. So I would say this is a handy little MVP tool if you're doing a lot of drive shaft modifications. Moving on to the challenge phase, we've got everything here we need for the install minus one vital component. So you know what that means. We're going back to the box. Let's get this open. Long time no see, Chad. What do you got here? Look at that. That is just what we needed. A little Palm Power 3S 180 milliamp hour battery. Look at the size of that thing. Just super small. A little bit bigger in this dimension, but you're not going to get much smaller than that for a 3S. So that's going to work perfect in this cramped little chassis. However, I think I felt something else in the box. Got a surprise for us, Chad? I think you do. Look at this beauty. Nice. So we've got a 3D printed purple roof from Shapeways. Well, that will definitely come in handy on this electronics portion of the build. So appreciate that, Chad. I think we've got everything we need now. So let's get moving. Let's take a close look here, compare these guys. So the finish here on the purple one is nice and consistent here, as you see. And you can pick your plastic on Shapeways and your finish as well, I believe. I think I went with a smooth. So you can kind of see the crosshatch patterning, and there's a little bit of divoting, kind of scarring. It's not bad, but you can definitely see it there in the light versus this one. Very consistent, smooth. So anyways, that's a quick comparison of the two roof panels. Well, less of a challenge phase than I thought. So this is a little bit easier than expected. Everything found a home in this tiny little chassis. So you can see I utilized the underside of the roof, some double-sided tape, and a little bit of magic to get this in there. You can see the little micro receiver peeking out. Gave me a nice little scale antenna through the window, so that worked out well. On this side, I've got that servo cable double-sided to the frame rail. And then I've just got the battery extension wedged in there, so that can be removed to kind of plug and unplug the battery, and then tucked in there for a nice clean look. And then the motor cable is just kind of coiled under its own tension. I'll flip this around so that comes back and keeps it off of the spinning motor. And then I've just got the cables kind of compressed and out of the way of the motor. So this is all working out really well. The battery extension just loops through there and then goes back. But the only thing lacking here is the Velcro for the battery. And I just got a little excited and thought we'd test this thing. So it's plugged up. Let's turn it on. Make sure it works. So that's up at 8.4 right there. So really fast. I can see that motor spinning. A little bit of torque twist. A little bit louder gearing with those metal gears, but not too bad. Still silent basically at low speed. All right, so everything works, but I think I'm gonna go for the bonus points here and see if I can't get a little bit of lighting up here on this servo. So for the lighting, we'll be using these Evan Designs 3mm violet LEDs. I actually ordered purple as well. Unfortunately, they sent me 5mm in the purple. I did hook them both up just to check the coloration, and really they seem super similar, except that obviously the 5mm was brighter. So this is what we're going to mount them into, and you can see it is set up for 3mm LEDs. This is a little 3D printed light mount for buggy builds. This is from Mofo RC, so it gives you a spot when you have no other spot for headlights. So it's kind of cool. It's going to move with the axle, obviously, so you've got to build in some slack. So I think I'm going to get a whip soldered up here, figure out my routing, and we should have lighting. Okay, the challenge phase is completed, and it really wasn't that difficult at all. So as you saw, I just soldered myself up a little whip here, did an uneven connection at the servo, and went ahead and kind of bent these and formed them. Went ahead and put shrink tube on before I made the connection back here to the little extension. So these are basically blacked out to this point, and in the extension you can see is just kind of held by tension under this roof panel. So it, you know, kind of snakes across here, comes up this A-pillar and plugs in, and basically keeps it hidden under that roof panel. You can see it in there. So that worked out really clean. I've got plenty of slack here for this articulation, and I didn't heat shrink this piece of tube. I think it is kind of back here at the connection a little bit, but I wanted to keep this flexible, and when you heat shrink the tube it becomes more rigid, so I didn't want to you know, cause any interference with any of this motion here. So I wanted that really loose to be able to move with the travel of the axle. So I think that's working well, and it just snakes through this empty space under the battery cable. So it, you know, plenty of room to get to the rear there. So I'm very happy with this LED setup, and I've tested them and they look great. But before we get it turned on, I think we need to get the wheels and tires on here, maybe get it on the scales, but we are basically about wrapped up here. Before we get these wheels and tires mounted back up, I figure we might want to check back in with Chad one last time to see if there's any final surprises here for the build. So you know the drill. Back to the box, let's get it open. Greetings, Chad. Let's see what you got for us. Ooh, I do feel something. Look at these beauties. So it looks like we've got some limited special edition wheels. So we are going to have some alternate wheels and tires on this build. So let's dive into these guys, take a closer look. Well, it looks like Chad wanted to introduce a little green to the build. So we've got some very nice looking limited edition splatter anodized wheels from Ktech. So these are aluminum rings, so they're not super heavy. I'm guessing they're around 11 grams. That's typically about the weight of these aluminum ring wheels, but just gorgeous. No two wheels are the same. And when I purchased these, they only had 2 sets of these on the site. So I just picked the splatter I liked a little bit better on the sets and chose that one. But man, I think these are just gorgeous. So of course, you know, we've already got an alternate set of tires picked out with the Baja Pro X's. So I'm going to get these mounted up and we'll see what they look like. Let's take a quick look at these before we get it on the scales. And wow, those look incredible. I didn't think it could get any better than the carbon fiber rings on the Treals, but man, those look awesome. So I swapped in some brass vented Njora rings, as you saw, to kind of equal out the weight of the 2 sets here. So I think that's going to be a good combo. And I did not vent these because I've got the vented rings, so I've kind of got a slow vent. But these do feel softer, especially through kind of the sidewall right here than the little guys. So I don't think these are going to require actually venting the tire. These feel really good on the stock foam. So anyways, with that said, let's go ahead and get it on the scale, see where we ended up here. So as you saw, we ended up with some pretty good stats in the final weigh-in, no matter which set of wheels was on there. So I believe the heaviest was 355, so still well under 400 grams, and either set of wheels was pretty close to 60-40, with the heavier set being the Treal coming up to 59% front bias. So pretty good just right out of the gate without any further, weight bias tuning. So I think with that said, let's turn this on and I'll give you a look at those finished headlights. So these are a nice violet here / purple. You can see those looking really nice. So in real life, they look a little more blue as far as the bulb, but the light is nice and purple. You can see there on my hand. Really nice. So I'm very happy with that. So let me square this up and let's take a look at this final drive ratio here. So we've got 23% OD in the front and 20% underdrive in the rear, so 43% difference there. So I don't think I've ever done that much. I've never run a 50% underdrive. I think the most I've done is a 33% overdrive. So let's see the difference here. That's quite a bit of difference there. Look at that. How did that happen? Wow. Crazy. That must have been some of the Chad magic right there. So anyways, I think it's time to get it off the stand and take one final look at it here. Well, we've at least got to see it move a little. So might as well do a little tabletop test here, although it probably won't do it any justice. Look at that, just crazy articulation. Might as well run it the opposite direction here. Look at that squish. So these are the Swamp Kings. Look at that, just gripping. Can claw up this, heck yeah. Look at that twist, that's just nuts. That slow control. Got a little sloppy there. I get back on course. Gotta say, I am super excited about this build. This thing just looks like a line killer. Alright, so I think that's enough tabletop testing. Here we are at the end of another build, and man, I am just blown away with this guy. Just a super fun build. Big shout out to Hardpark, big shout out to Chad. I don't know what they did, how they did it, how they crammed so much stuff into that box, but it's like a clown car. You just never knew what was gonna come out of there next. But every little surprise ended up being a great addition to this build. I think it makes it super unique. Just loving the splatter wheels. That may be my favorite thing on here. The roof as well, that is super cool. Down to the violet lighting, the purple servo. Just loving it. Really like the carbon rings. So lots of little added features and details. The purple shocks, man, just killer. Could not be any happier with this build. Let's just set it up here for now. Give us a little pose here. But like I say, I recommend this kit. Everything Hardpark comes out with is super limited and hard to get your hands on. So if you're on the site and you see it, I would recommend going ahead and picking it up if you want it. But they do have another version of this Dementor with another roof tweak. So it's more of an SUV style. So that may be on the list for me down the road. But I think for now, the Vdub is going to have to do. And I'm just fine with that because this thing looks killer. So as always, I appreciate you coming along on the build. I hope you learned something. I know I did. This was a whole new kind of chassis for me. So a lot of setup learning for me, tweaking, but that is part of the fun. I always like a little challenge, a little bit of troubleshooting. It wouldn't be a fun build if it all went super smooth, now would it? I don't think so. With that said, I think this is going to conclude the Hardpark SCX24 mystery build, which is a mystery no longer. But I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely did. And until next time, thanks for watching.